today. Usually there's some sort of lack of revenue, that's very common. So you have mitigating control ways that help combat those types of items. So great job in that regard. In addition, this year there's an additional component where a report was done and a single audit was done in accordance with uniform guidance. So uniform guidance is the language, but you're probably more familiar with the single terminology, excuse me. So when you spend more than $1 million for expenditures, this is required. So the program that was tested was the highway planning and construction program. There were no findings in relation to any of that additional test work. And then one final component before we dig into the financial analysis is in regards to Minnesota legal compliance. The Office of the State Auditor compiles a number of Minnesota state statutes into their checklist that they ask us to ask questions about. We do not have any findings related to any of that either. So all good news on that front. And with that, we'll look into the financial analysis here. So we begin with your general fund revenues. In total, the general fund revenues increased a little over 5%, the majority of that happening in taxes and assessments with an increase in the levy. Here we look at those revenues in kind of that pie chart format in comparison to the previous year. Very consistent in this analysis. Changes are less than 1%, and kind of that continued presentation or funding flow, the taxes continue to be the main source of revenue for the general fund. Similar presentation for expenditures. Expenditures in the general fund increased of 4.7%. Largest component that increased was public works. A few different things came into play here, so just kind of run through them. Increased labor costs due to wage adjustments as well as increased benefit costs. There was increased engineering costs, crack ceiling project, and sirens purchased and a parking lot project. So a few different things, like I said, that kind of played into that. And then public safety expenditures increased as well. There was an increase of wages and benefits, increased equipment purchases, building repairs and renovations, and then software and insurance costs.
Can I just ask a question? It says
Yep.
culture and recreation. What is considered culture?
That's kind of the parks area typically, or it could be any of, sometimes there's nature preserve, could be any of that type of, it's that.
Okay, I was thinking like arts.
That's, yeah.
It could be. I mean, if you're, it's how the government categories are grouped together. So if you have a museum or a community center or
That just jumped out at me because it was unusual.
That's the more common that I see, but yeah, it's a good example. All right, and a similar presentation here, then looking at it from that pie chart format. The fluctuations that you're seeing here really are driven by the explanations I just mentioned when we looked at it from a dollar standpoint. So seeing public works as a percentage increased, that really is driving a lot of the other changes. Public safety does continue to be that largest spending component at right around 39% of the general fund. Here we have a budget to actual snapshot for the general fund. So final budget anticipated a decrease in fund balance as shown in that very first column there all the way at the bottom. Actual results are the second column showing that fund balance increased about $390,000 for the year. And then a variance column there in that third, as well as a percentage. So if we look to for explanations on some of the variances, all the way to the kind of the top third there, total revenues over to that variance column. See over budget, that's 2.3% as we see by that far column. The largest component of that is in the miscellaneous. That is where interest income is recorded, and that's where the market value change of investments is recorded as well, which is a snapshot on December 31st of where the market values are on your investments. Very common for that to be a budget variance line item, as it's unknown what that can be on that given day, and a very common approach is to kind of budget conservatively as is done here, because you really don't know where that could go from one day to the next or 1 year to the next. Following the chart down for expenditures and the variance that we see there, that's showing under budget, again applying a percentage to that at 6.3%. General government being under budget, that had to do with repairs and maintenance and insurance and contingencies that weren't utilized. Public safety expenditures were under budget, really more on the personnel costs due to position vacancies during the first half of the year. And then culture and recreation expenditures were under budget there as well, with personnel costs for some vacancies there as well. Here we bring the general fund kind of all together. We've touched on revenues and expenditures already, so here we all also saw the change in fund balance. Here we kind of see the components of fund balance. So we talked about that fund balance increased about $390,000. Total fund balance for the year then was $5.6 million. We kind of drill down, we look at the unassigned, which is included here. That's $4.4 million at the end of the year. That represents 45.3% of the revenue for 2025. As a benchmark, the office of the state auditor's office has put out guidance that a benchmark for that would be 35 to 50%, so you are in line with that recommendation that they've put out. Another way to look at that fund balance and kind of where you'd like it to be, or not even where you'd like it to be, but just another way to look at it would be from an expenditure standpoint as well. And so it's 56.2%. That unassigned fund balance is 56.2% of current year expenditures. So right or just over half of the year, which is also a reasonable balance when you look at the fact that that revenue or that fund balance, needs to get you to kind of this time of the year based on tax settlement payments that you receive, as well as LGA payments, that those happen kind of semi-annually. So reasonable balances from all those perspectives. Here are the tax capacity, the levy and tax capacity rates. So tax capacity is the green there, an increase about 5.2% for the year. The levy is the orange or the rust color, increase about 4.5% for the year. So just as kind of a result of that tax capacity increasing at a slightly higher rate than the levy did, you're seeing a slight decrease in that tax capacity rate. Then we shift gears to your enterprise funds. We start with your water fund here. Operating revenues in the water fund did increase by around 6%, a little over 6%. Really had to do with an increase in the water usage that was billed during the year. Operating expenses decreased. That had to do with fewer repairs and maintenance, as well as lower water purchases. So at the end of the day, the fund did experience operating loss when factoring in depreciation expense. You see that we have kind of two lines there, with and without depreciation expense. Really is a means for you to analyze the fund. We do that to show how much of your operating costs are being covered by your charges for services. And depreciation expense is one that every city kind of handles a little bit different. They want to cover it completely with the charges for services or a portion of it. So this just gives you kind of the idea of where that's on. You're covering about 31% based on the charges for services for 2025. So again, that can vary from one entity to the next, one fund to the next, and where you want this to be. It's just a way for you to analyze the health of the fund. Other components to use in that analysis is looking at what cash investments as well as unrestricted net position did. So cash investments increased about $921,000 for the year, so even though there was that loss, you're still increasing based on capital contributions and transfers and things of that nature that help to still increase the fund for the net position. Unrestricted net position, there's a component of net position that is tied up in your capital assets. So you've invested those dollars in the capital assets. It's not available for future operations. So that's taken out of this analysis. This is just the unrestricted net position, the portion that would be available for future operations. So an increase there as well, about $946,000. Similar analysis then when we look at the sewer fund. Operating revenues increased here as well, just under 3%. Operating expenses were up. There was an increase in the accounts billed and the usage being billed, as well as an increase in, that was on the revenue side, excuse me, and then on the expense side, increases in professional services for engineering and sewer treatment, repairs and maintenance, and equipment purchases. So similar analysis here when you look at those far two bars in each one, so seeing an operating loss for the year, kind of with those additional repairs and maintenance and engineering costs and things of that nature. So covering about 2% of your net position, seeing that cash and investments did go down, and then unrestricted net position increased, so about 269,000. So it's still ending the year at, 6.7 million and 4.8 million, so still in healthy positions there. Stormwater fund is the last fund that we have to touch on. Operating revenues increased here, just under 3%. There's an increase in the impervious surface bill. Operating expenses increased. There's an increase in kind of, again, multiple different things. Depreciation, legal fees, equipment purchases, and repairs and maintenance, so a few different things going on there. So at the end of the day, an operating loss here as well, but covering about 79% of depreciation expense for this fund. And then from a cash investments and unrestricted net position, so kind of a bounce back in that cash investments line item for this year. Had a couple of years of kind of break even with projects and things that were going on. And so kind of a, like I said, an increase in that area and as well as that unrestricted net position. Happy to take any questions you might have for me as well.
So any questions of her?
A lot of information. It was, sorry, I know.
Jeremy, anything to add, or?
No, I just say that I went really smoothly again this year, thanks to our staff, and finance department, particularly Brenda, was a big help with that. We did have a single audit for the first time too, and that was kind of new horizon for us to kind of cross, and the auditors were particularly helpful with that, as well as Trevor Thompson from Public Works, assisting with specifically for the design of the project and the federal funds that we received for that. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kowski. Okay, move on to number 2.
Hello. Oh, sorry about that. Hi, my name is Nick Barula. I'm a mechanical engineer with SEH, and I'm here to talk about the ventilation assessment at the water treatment facility. So SEH was retained by the city to take a look, evaluate, and assess ventilation systems throughout the water treatment plant. This was primarily precipitated because the water plant has experienced a number of persistent issues with indoor air quality, corrosion, high humidity levels, persistent chlorine odor throughout the facility. So we were retained to take a look at it, go through the facility, really look at code compliance, ventilation throughout the plant, equipment condition, how the equipment was operated and so forth, come up with some conclusions about what we think is causing the issue and some recommendations to address the concerns and improve the indoor air quality, mitigate these issues. And so when we looked at when we went through, we did the assessment, what we found is that there is ventilation equipment in the facility now that no longer functions due to the corrosive nature of the chlorine in the air. This exacerbates some code compliance issues. There are spaces throughout the plant that have no ventilation, and so that's, obviously having no ventilation, and then the equipment that you do have a lot of it is no longer functional, is really what's ultimately leading to these issues. So we put together a series of recommendations to get the equipment, get new equipment online and operating, increase the ventilation, and ventilate the spaces that aren't currently ventilated. To, again, increase the indoor air quality, flush the chlorine odor from the space in so much as we can, reduce corrosion, and overall, by doing this, we're going to, make the space, improve the indoor air quality, but we'll also extend the life of a lot of the equipment in the facility because it'll help mitigate corrosion and so forth. And so I wanted to talk through the options or the recommendations that we came up with to correct these issues. So I'm going to skip to the back of the ventilation report that we put together and get to the marked up plans that you see now on the screen. So this is the layout of the water treatment plant. There's essentially on the west side of the facility, it's primarily Public Works water plant, and on the east side, there's the divider, and it's primarily office and public works space. And so what we found when we started looking at the ventilation systems for the facility, we found a lot of the areas such as this space here, which is referred to as the aerator room, the pipe gallery, the high service pump room. There is no ventilation currently in those spaces. And so there are some equipment that ventilate areas like the basement and so forth. But those equipment, we found that the corrosion has rendered them inoperable at the moment. So our recommendation for phase one, and phase one is budgeted for the 26-27 year, is to replace the ventilation unit located on what we call makeup area unit 3, located on the west side of the facility, increase the capacity, and actually use this new unit to ventilate the entire central corridor of the facility, which is unventilated, the basement, as well as the aerator room. We feel that by increasing the capacity of this unit, replacing it, and ventilating those spaces continuously, we can reduce the chlorine intrusion, reduce the odors, improve the indoor air quality, and lower humidity. So that's one piece of the phase one improvements. The second piece of the phase one improvements, I should say all phase one are in red on this plan sheet markup, is to replace what's labeled as FC2 or fan coil unit 2. This unit originally was installed to ventilate and service the high service pump room. It's no longer operable. Both cooling circuits no longer operate. The unit's been rendered inoperable due to corrosion and so forth. So we are recommending that this unit be replaced as well with, again, a somewhat higher capacity unit that will ventilate the high service pump room, which is currently unventilated, and the pipe gallery, which is a space that's also unventilated. So that would be essentially phase one. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. When you say unventilated, currently unventilated, it's unventilated because the units that were originally there aren't working.
That's right.
Are all of these spaces were ventilated originally, correct?
No. So that's a good question. The spaces, there are several spaces throughout the facility that were not ventilated originally.
How does that meet code?
So it does not meet the current code. And so that's one of
The code when it was built?
that is a tricky question because when it was built, as I understand it, it was not intended to be occupied in the way it is now. Furthermore, there are some, when you get into ventilation code, there are some, if you interpret this space as transitory and unoccupied, you can make a case it doesn't need to be ventilated. And as I understood it, when the facility was first built, it was never really intended to be occupied for a full day. So did it meet code back in, 2000 or whenever it was built? I couldn't say it absolutely didn't. It went through all the permitting reviews and so forth. Does it meet code now? I can definitively say no, it does not meet code now. Certain spaces don't, that is.
Because we've changed the use.
Because we've changed the use, we have, these spaces are occupied, it's, the facility operates in a full 8-hour shift. There's occupants there all the time. So currently it doesn't meet code. And as part of these improvements, our intent is to bring those spaces that no longer meet code up to code, so that, hey, we're in compliance with the current code. We're kind of, killing two birds with one stone. We're going to improve the indoor air quality. We're going to meet code. We're going to extend the life of the process equipment, which is really the critical function of the water plant, right? And so by upgrading this equipment, I think it's going to go a long ways to mitigate those issues that we've seen. And then we will, comply with those. But I could point out this unit here that's in red. Now it only serves the basement. There's a basement pipe. It doesn't ventilate the upper level. It doesn't ventilate the aerator space. A lot of these occupied spaces aren't ventilated. So when we put the new unit in, we're going to reduct, increase capacity, and ventilate everything in accordance with code. So that's really phase one. We're replacing one air handler now that currently only serves the basement, and we're going to retrofit that unit to serve a lot of currently unventilated spaces. And then we're also going to replace a unit that's in the high service pump room, and we're going to use that to ventilate the high service pump and the pipe gallery. So these are all spaces that, as I said, are not currently ventilated, and in addition, the equipment in the space no longer functions. And so that's the purpose of phase one. And I think our assessment is that's what's going to achieve the improved indoor air quality and lower the humidity throughout the space.
That unit that we're replacing on your little sheet, is it currently a DOAS unit?
It's currently a makeup air unit, meaning it does 100% outside air. Well, it can recirculate air in certain instances. We would replace it with a DOAS unit, which is dedicated 100% outside air. Does that make sense?
So, what's the fuel for that unit?
Currently it's natural gas. It's a natural gas heating unit, no cooling, okay? We are proposing to replace it with a new unit that has a hot water coil fed from the boiler system that's currently in the facility. And then we would add an element of cooling to it to dehumidify the air. We don't want to bring a lot of humidity into the plant because that, again, all the piping's cold and it's going to be below the dew point, bang, you're going to get corrosion. So
where's that coming from, a new compressor? Or
yeah, and so we would have a new condensing compressor unit out on grade. And our intent, there's a series of condensers out here now. They're blocked with a fence. Our intent would be to extend the fence to maintain sort of the aesthetics of it. You're not going to see this ugly compressor sitting adjacent to the building. And also,
You're the first mechanical engineer that's ever said that.
we want things to look good. Even mechanical engineers want things to look good. Functional, but look good. So we'd extend the fence and hide that unit. I think there is we haven't gone through the design process yet. We may be, depending on the final selections, may be able to squeeze it in behind the fence, but I suspect not. There's a lot of stuff here. So in our cost estimates and so forth, we included the cost of extending the fence. And I should say there is a cooling element to this unit as well. However, that condenser would go up on the roof, and it's already hidden. There's a condenser there now. We take the old one off that doesn't work, put a new one back on. So both units would have both heating and cooling capability.
And all of what you're saying is already budgeted for?
This is already budgeted for. Phase one, everything in red is already budgeted for. Okay.
Confirm that again.
And that's as I said, the 26, 27, I guess, fiscal year. I don't know if it's the fiscal year, whatever. It's budgeted for. As we looked at it, there are some ancillary things that we are recommending again, to meet code compliance and improve indoor air quality. So phase 2 is what we've scoped for the second phase, everything in blue, that would be part of the 27-28 cycle. And so what we're recommending in that case is to replace the makeup air unit that serves the chemical rooms. So that unit currently functions. The mechanical contractors on the site have been able to keep it operational, but it's well past its expected service life. There's visible corrosion. It's not in great condition, but so we would recommend that it be replaced. And this new unit would operate and ventilate the chemical rooms continuously. Currently, the chemical rooms are only ventilated when someone walks into the space. And based on the chemical quantity, that doesn't meet the current code. So we have to ventilate those chemical rooms continuously. This new unit will ramp down and operate at a low speed when the space is unoccupied to save energy. And then when someone walks in, it will ramp up to a higher speed. This will allow you to comply with code. It's going to keep the chemical rooms ventilated continuously, keep the chemical, things like the fluoride, chlorine vapors from migrating from the chemical room to the rest of the facility. And we'll just improve the overall indoor air quality of the space by getting that system running continuously in a proper fashion. So that's part of phase 2. And then the other part of phase 2, and I should say, along with the replacement of the makeup air unit that feeds the chemical wing, we are recommending new exhaust fans that feed the chemical wing as well. Particularly in the fluoride room, a significant amount of corrosion, and as part of this process, we recommend these fans be replaced. And then the other piece for phase 2 is to replace a unit that serves the main lobby and some of the office area of the space. So currently, those, when you essentially pass this line, you're moving from the water treatment plant side to the public works side. And the equipment there, it ventilates to some degree, but we don't feel that it's ventilating properly or enough, and that's causing a lot of indoor air quality issues and pressure issues in the lobby and the adjacent spaces. This bathroom was converted to an office. And so what we want to do is increase the ventilation in these spaces. Again, so you don't get that real strong chlorine vapor, you don't get chlorine vapor migrating from the water treatment facility side into the office side, and also properly ventilate this space, which was a bathroom. Now someone's actually working in that. And so we want to make sure that space is ventilated properly as well. So phase 2 is really replacement of chemical wing ventilation equipment and replacing of HVAC ventilation equipment that serves the front office, or the front entry lobby and adjacent office space. We felt that the items in phase 1 are the most critical. That equipment no longer functions properly. That's why we made that phase 1. And we feel that it's more, that's going to be the most critical piece to improving the air quality in the facility. And then phase 2 is, again, code compliance and improving indoor air quality for occupied spaces in the facility.
So without the exhausting of the water plant, are you going to get a little bit of negative pressure in there? And would that be beneficial to have a negative pressure in there, positive pressure in the...
Yes. So ventilation, particularly when you're dealing with water plants, the pressure relationships get really tricky, because if you draw too big of a negative pressure in the water plant, you will start to suck vapor through, there's clear wells underneath the plant and there's vapor migration, but we do want a slight negative or neutral and positive on that public works site. Absolutely, to keep vapors from migrating from the the water plant site into the public works site. And part of that, by replacing this equipment and increasing the ventilation, we can help maintain a positive pressure in here. We're also going to help keep outside air out as you go through the vestibule, but also keep things from migrating from this water plant side into the occupied public works site.
So looking at this from a, say, layman's side,
Yeah.
You kind of went through that as we discussed it, but.
Yeah, I should say,
As I read the notes, everything's new, and
it
it is new.
It is new, and you're right. I guess, that's a good point. It maybe makes it a little more like, whoa, like, we're not adding all this stuff. We're taking stuff that's, terminal and doesn't work anymore out and replacing it. It isn't quite one-to-one replacement
Right.
in the sense that, hey, we're adding some cooling capability, we're increasing the capacity, but point taken. I mean, if you glance at it, you may think we're just completely overhauling, adding all kinds of new stuff that wasn't there before. Really, it's a replacement effort, by and large, with equipment that we feel is better suited for the space and will be better serve the occupants and so forth.
And corrosion proof, right?
Yeah, and so everything that we would spec would be corrosion proof, NEMA 4X, coated, and so forth. We do a lot of water plants, and this is something we fight with on, just about every water plant we deal with, is the corrosive nature of the air. Chlorine really wreaks havoc on really even stainless steel is bad enough. We'll start to etch stainless steel, rust it out, and so forth. So we put a lot of effort into making sure the stuff that we specify is suitable for the environment that it would be in. So, any other questions on anything in the report or what I've stated here?
I don't know if it might not be for you. I'm just wondering a little bit if somebody can go deeper on the change in use in the facility. I understand we're putting out more water than we did. I think my understanding is this plant was built in 2007, which doesn't make it that old. And this isn't the first time we've had to do major upgrades to this plant. So I'm a little curious about what changed so much in the last 19 years aside from volume of water treated, or maybe is that the reason for it, and like what has led to all of this failure in what appears to be a short time in comparison to other things that we invest in?
I got some of that history and what happened. I think Trevor had the real load of how the plant was built and so forth. But it was explained to me that ultimately, due to a series of issues when they were drilling the wells, they ended up needing approximately 6 times the dosing of chlorine with the water to, properly treat the water than they anticipated in what they call their pilot study. So they did a pilot study, and it looked at what they would need to do to treat the water, and ultimately what became of it was that when they actually put the plant online, that you had to use a lot more chlorine. And so that's, as I understand, that's a big piece of it. And then beyond that, as I said earlier, what I was told was that when this was designed, it was never intended to be occupied for a full 8 hours. There's supposed to be people at the water plant intermittently, but it was supposed to be a very minimally occupied building. And then what ended up happening was they found that they had to staff it more regularly, and then they added the public works piece to it. So now that's added onto it. So there's folks there, and so ultimately it ends up being a higher dosage of chlorine that was required. So just we weren't anticipating this much dosing and so forth, and then more occupants. And that's sort of the history that I was told. The water folks could probably get into that in more detail.
The other thing that's happened is we've probably gone through 3 code changes since then.
Yeah, there are a lot of, anyone that's in consulting, you see the code every 4 years, 5 years, they come up with another one. And they kind of keep increasing with the intent. A lot of times the intent is it's really occupant safety, and so forth. And what we find, we've tried all kinds of different things at water treatment plants. Water treatment plants are tricky because there's just a lot of contaminants in the air. And, you want to weigh this. So you're trying to weigh the aspect of minimizing energy usage with the idea of keeping the air as fresh as you can. And we've tried ventilating at these rates from half an air change an hour up to 12 air changes per hour, you know. We have clients that do 1 air change per hour. We tend to find that with water plants, you have to ventilate it at a higher rate even than what code recommends, just because the air quality in these spaces inherently more contaminated with different things like chlorine and there's fluoride, chemical weight, and so forth. And so, you know, that's what I think is so critical with this project. There's spaces that just aren't ventilated at all, let alone ventilated at a higher rate to just sort of mitigate these contaminants in the water plant. And so that's why we really want to focus on getting those items that, replacing those pieces of equipment with units that can actually ventilate these unventilated spaces, bring in more air, and then try to do it as energy efficient as we can. With the, like I said, the corrosion, the construction, materials used, that we don't, you know, have the units, you know, out of order after 3 years because they're currently doing this or that.
And 20 years is pretty good for
Yeah, it is
a
actually.
area like this.
Well, we're running a lot more water through there,
Right.
putting in new wells to the point.
That's a big part of it, too. I just, you know, I think that everything you were told is true, you know, don't you agree? With the background of it, I think from the chief seats, though, it just seems like it's always something. And, you know, I want to say nickel and dime, but not at 500,000, it's not it's not nickel and dime. You know, it seems like we're always, okay, this will do it now. This is the answer, we won't have to do this again, and yet we do. And so,
Every 25 years should be written.
well, I think we've had this conversation more than 25 years ago, but, and so, you know, and I realize everything that's been said is true and whatnot, and things do change, but yeah, again, from my perspective, you'd like to see some, okay, is this the answer now? Are we really sure that this is it? Maybe it's the answer for this year, or do I don't know. You know, I don't know if you know what I'm trying to say here or not.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I mean, you don't want to be chasing your tail and, okay, we have these issues, what if we try this? Well, what if we try this? We want to just like get to the bottom of it, figure out what do we do to mitigate this issue. And that's what we're trying to do as part of this assessment. I think it's, you know, when you look at it, the reality is that when it was designed, for whatever reason, these areas that aren't ventilated, I mean, you can do different controls, tweaks, and do different things to try to mitigate this when you have these issues. But to really fix it, you really just have to ventilate the spaces that are currently unventilated. And that's why we're recommending we do this. So in so much as trying to mitigate the issue once and for all, this is what we feel we should do. You know, by bringing more fresh air in, you're going to flush a lot more of those contaminants and so forth. And,
But you gotta understand, we're using today's engineering standards to do it.
Sure.
And you can't predict what tomorrow's engineering standards are going to be. And, I mean, we go through this, I go through this in my job every day. We're tearing out the guts of our buildings and redoing them 25 to 50 years. But they don't have this corrosive nature that we have in this plant. So $500,000 for equipment in phase one, and the number of units you put in and the exhaust fans, that actually seems kind of low to me.
Mayor Olson,
Yes, sir.
if you don't mind, I'm glad you asked that question, because in the 2026 budget, we had included for replacing makeup unit 3 along with fan coil 2. And we've been moving those along for a few years and knew that they needed to be replaced. Through the process of just discussing with staff, we identified that some of these other areas seem to be needing ventilation as well. So that's why we move forward with this ventilation assessment. If we were gonna spend $500,000, we wanna make sure that the $500,000 is the best use of whatever equipment we're putting in there. So through that process, we hired SEH to complete this review and identified that, 2026, we've got $584,000 2027 to complete this, that phase 2 portion is gonna be another 350,000 is what's estimated. So that's why we wanted to bring that forward and just make sure that you guys understood that, yes, it's 20 years old, it's in a corrosive environment, but we wanted to review it as a whole to make sure that these improvements, we could piggyback on some of them, like makeup unit 3, being able to ventilate some of the other spaces instead of just replacing it in kind and then finding out we should have done something more and then having it cost more money in the long run. So between phase 1 and phase 2, we should address all of the water treatment plant issues with the HVAC system.
Thanks for doing that. I'm not trying to do that, it's part of the story, don't go ahead with that. Just have the question, it just gets, it seems frustrating that it's not revealed.
Yes, agreed.
At this point, you're not, the air quality is still safe for employees to be in
That's correct. The air quality, the staff have measured chlorine levels of 0.4 parts per million at the highest, and that's in the worst spots in the plant, spaces that are unventilated. And the California OSHA, since the 8-hour time weighted average, is 0.5 parts per million. So you're below the California standard for, California OSHA standard for a 8-hour time weighted average.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much for your explanations and your time, appreciate it.
All right, thank you. And so, with that, we're asking that you accept the ventilation assessment for the water treatment plant, that's item number 6. And I think, as you know, this was previously presented to the Utility Commission, and they are, they're supportive of the modifications. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Look for a motion to adjourn the workshop.
So moved.
Second.